So we're now going to move on to part 2 of the session. And for this first part, we're going to hear from some of the exciting PhD research that's been undertaken as part of FaNSI. So we are really pleased to welcome 2 speakers here today, and then we're going to have 1 video presentation that's pre-recorded. So first, I'd like to welcome to the stage Laura Utume, who's going to talk about her PhD research, and I'll let you introduce it. Again, these will be short 8-minute presentations, and you'll have an opportunity at lunch to pick up with the students afterwards. And then we'll move into the final part of the session where we have the 2 keynote presentations. So thanks again, and please do take your seats if you haven't done so already. Thank you. A warm hand for Laura, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Permit me to observe the already established protocol. My name is Laura Utume, and I'm a second-year PhD student, and I'll be presenting on the development of Safe for the Gut, ready-to-use therapeutic food to tackle the double burden of malnutrition. I know it's a mouthful, but I'm sure when I go through it, you'll see what I'm doing. So my outline basically will just be very short presentations in about 4 or 5 headings. I'll try to establish the gap and tell you what I'm doing and then the design of what I've done so far. And I'll present a few results. I won't be telling you so much of my results because I haven't published anything yet, and I'm trying to be, keep it close to my chest for now. So by way of introduction, I'm working on malnutrition. Basically, that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm working on understanding certain biological mechanisms in the human system, but I'm working with rat models. So this is just a brief definition of what acute malnutrition is. And if you look there on the screen, I have like a table showing the indicators for how malnutrition is being classified. You have children that are stunted, wasted, underweight, and all of that. What it basically means is that a child is too short for their age, or is too thin for their height, or too thin for their age or too heavy for their height. So this has been a problem over time, and we have statistics telling us that just in 2022, we had about 148.1 million children stunted, another 45 million children wasted, and then 37 million children overweight. My focus is on stunting and wasting, so to say, severe acute malnutrition. These statistics are from 2022 over the years. You know what is happening in the world now with the wars in Gaza and DRC in Ukraine and all of that. So only God knows what the numbers will be if we were to take some statistics afterwards. So indeed, we do have a problem on our hand. I like to call it a silent pandemic. So basically what I am trying to do is to work with the solutions that the WHO and UNICEF and World Food Programme have evolved over the years to try to treat acute malnutrition. I think I'm going too fast. Okay. So over the years, a lot of research has been done to try to understand and to help treat malnutrition. And the 3 notable ones are the F75, F100, and now the RUTFs. RUTFs are just lipid-based anhydrous pastes that are actually nutritionally dense, and they are preferred now because they can actually be given to mothers to treat their children at home. We've had a lot of research done in Africa and in Asia because this is where you have a lot of children malnourished or severely acutely malnourished. Now, for me as a microbiologist, what I want to understand is not just rolling out RUTFs and finding solutions and all of that, because indeed, RUTFs still have some sort of shortfalls. So I'm trying to understand the mechanism so that if we understand these mechanisms, probably we can use them to develop better RUTFs that will be of use to us all. So what did I set out to do? My aim basically is to try to illustrate therapeutic diet and gut-related, that's the bacterial microbiome, that's what I'm interested in, and the metabolic fingerprint that depicts acute malnutrition recovery. And by so doing, I want to deepen an understanding and establish the potential contribution of a plant-based IUTF that was formulated in 2022 in Kenya. That's what I'm working with as well. So in order to do this, like I said, I couldn't, of course, I didn't want to go into the clinical trials, but I decided to do preclinical experiments. So I worked with some rats, And I did this study somewhere in Israel, in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. I was there for a number of months, and I got 3-week-old rats that had just been weaned, and we got them divided into 2 main groups. One group were fed on a controlled diet, or like a balanced, healthy diet that is recommended for rats by the American Institute of Nutrition. And then I did some sort of alteration to the diet to reduce the protein content such that I was able to mimic diet-based malnutrition in these rats. And then after 3 weeks of initial feeding on this diet, there was a diet switch for 2 groups, where the healthy ones were given the standard RUTF. This is what it looks like, the standard RUTF. That is a peanut buttermilk-based mixture, and that's what WHO and the World Food Program, well, everything, that's what they use in treating malnutrition. And then I also worked with my own formulation that was formulated in Kenya by some collaborators I'm working with. And then for the malnourished rats, we did the same thing. Fed them the same standard RUTF you can find in the market, and then also the SMS. And after 6 weeks, well, before the 6 weeks in the course of the experimental period, I was taking their body measurements to see whether they were adding weight or growing as regards length. And then I was taking their stool samples as well. And at the end of 6 weeks, my poor babies had to be sacrificed. And I harvested everything. I took their organs, cecum, intestines, everything, basically. And they are stored in Israel, where I'll be doing some more work on them. And I traveled back to the UK with some other samples that I did some sort of analysis on. And these are just a few results like I'll be sharing. So like I told you initially, I'm interested in what's happening in the gut, because you know that you're what you eat, and a healthy gut is a healthy you. So basically what I did was to examine the cecum, because everything you eat through your gut is more or less filtered and is there in your cecum. So if you can get a fingerprint or a snapshot of what is happening in your cecum, you'll be able to get what's happening in the gut, so to say. And after the first experiment to try to understand the kind of bacteria, or the healthy, or the bacteria generally, not healthy or not healthy at this point in time, to see what happened, I was able to come down to these tags. Of course, there was a whole lot, but I had to do some sort of screening as well to take out the genus that were less than 1%, because that would have made my result quite cumbersome. And these bacteria that are here left are indeed of interest. Something I was also able to observe is that across all the groups, and even in the individual 48 rats, you had different mixtures of bacteria, so to say. And worthy of note is that there was a dominance of bifidobacterium, which we know is a healthy bacteria for the gut. And this is just a PCA analysis of what I've shown you before, trying to see in as few dimensions as possible to see the similarities or the differences. And this, for me, is very interesting, because you will notice that the healthy and the malnourished group are actually like showing some sort of similarities, and it differs from what the treatment groups is happening. This you can simply say it's because you have bifidobacterium dominance is beginning to establish and all of that, which is a good thing, because bifidobacterium is one of the early colonizers of the gut in, should I say, animal life. It's in humans, in rats, and rat I used and all of that. And it is good that we're having that dominance, because we all know that bifido is responsible for protecting our gut and also the production of certain useful nutrients in our body, like the B vitamins are produced in our body because of the activities of bifidobacterium. So I still do have more research and more analysis to do based on all that I harvested from my rats. Like, I want to also look at what the bones are saying, because there is research now saying that bones are actually linked to our gut as well. And if you have a bad skeletal structure, then growth can be impeded and all of that. And at this juncture, I'll say, permit me to say thank you to all of you for listening. Thank you to my employers, BSU, my funders, TED Fund. Of course, I'm not a naughty child not to acknowledge my supervisors who are in the room. And of course, my 48 rats, on whose tiny shoulders my PhD family stands, and to all my collaborators, University of Kent, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I enjoyed my stay while in Israel. I'm looking forward to going back, hopefully, if Sherry will allow me. And thank you to every other partner. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laura. So now I'd like to welcome Ebun up to the stage. Ebun, are you working your way down? Yeah, great. So Ebun's going to talk about her research investigating dietary drivers among slum dwellers in the urban food environment of Lagos State in Nigeria. So welcome, Ebun. One hand for Ebun, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ebun Luawotinye, and this afternoon I'll be making a presentation on my topic titled Investigating Dietary Drivers Among Slum Dwellers in the Urban Food Environment of Lagos State, Nigeria. Sorry, it's also a mouthful, but bear with me. Okay, so this is the outline, but majorly today I'll be focusing on my research process, and that's because the slums, as we know, are underrepresented in many of the research today, and because of their dynamics, the complexity of the social and political gaining access into these settings. So I really want to focus on the research process, but this is an outline showing the definition of my key terms, which I will not really be going into because a lot of people have done justice to my terms, but except for the slum, which is characterized by overcrowding and, of course, lack or inadequate access to one or two or more basic services. So as a means of background, also Cheryl has done a lot of justification to my background, and by telling us that there is an increased availability, accessibility to poor quality diets all around the world today, and we know that these poor quality diets are a leading cause of mortality and morbidity worldwide. But where does the slum dwellers come in? Now, in the world, or in low and middle income countries, particularly including Nigeria, slum dwellers contribute about 50% or more to the informal employment of these countries. And they have inadequate or they lack access to these basic services, such as access to sanitation, safe water, health services, and they are at risk or they are susceptible to infections and diseases. Now, if the slum dwellers contribute more than 50% of the informal employment to the urban economies of countries of Lagos, for instance, you can imagine what will be lost in terms of the human and economic growth and development. And for Lagos State, for example, Lagos State currently has about 25 million residents. And according to Popol Bay, it says that about 16 million of these residents live in slums, which means that 16 million of these residents either lack or have inadequate access to these services or are living in densely populated areas. So, my main objective is to examine the multi-level determinants or the multi-level drivers of diet amongst the slum dwellers in the urban food environment of Lagos State. And the specific objectives are to examine the urban slum food environment, to assess the diet quality, and three, to examine the perceptions and the experiences of the slum dwellers. I mentioned earlier that I'll be focusing really on the research process. So, to the far left is one of my slums, which is the Ajegunle slum, located in the Ajeromi local government of Lagos State, Nigeria. Right in the middle is the popular Makoko, which is a land and water-based slum. And to the far right, is the Agoegun slum, which is located in Shomolu local government in the southwest area of Lagos State. So, the research process. Initially, Lagos State was selected because, one, it is the most populous city in Africa, and two, because Lagos State currently, like I said, it has about 60 million of its residents living in slums as at today. So it was selected purposively for this study to assess their diet quality. Now, I moved to identification of slums, which was done focusing on checking existing literature to identify the slums that are already existing in terms of Lagos State, and also a visit to the Ministry of Urban Planning showed that there are over 100 slums in Lagos State alone. While some are transient because they are destroyed, others are new and they are just forming as a result of either destruction of previous slums or influx of migrants. Then I moved to the initial selection of the slums. Now, the slums are selected based on several criteria, one of which is their existence in literature. Secondly, based on their geographical location, because I wanted to check the differences in the diet quality and the food environment of the slums. So 3 slums were selected based on whether they were on land, land and water-based or water-based slums. So 3 slums were selected, and also for reasons such as their age and also for reasons such as forced evictions, to check if the forced evictions of the slums have effects on their diet quality and also on their food environment. So for Ajegunle slum, they had never experienced any forced eviction. Makoko has experienced 1 forced eviction, while Agoegun has experienced 2 forced evictions. So they are currently in a new site, which at the moment is still under discussion because they are planning on demolishing that slum currently. So I moved to the stakeholder meetings with the local government officials, and I must say it was a tedious task for me, getting to meet with the local government officials with respect to slums. Because when you talk about slums in Lagos State, the only thing in the mind of urban planners is how to demolish these slums, make it more habitable for others who can afford it, not thinking of what they actually contribute to the government of that state. So having the stakeholders meeting with the local government officials, which is the 3rd-tier administrative unit of Nigeria. We have the federal government, the state government, and the local government. I moved over to the stakeholders meeting with the traditional leaders in the slums, and I must say for each slum, I experienced different scenarios. So, for example, Makoko has about 9 traditional leaders, all focusing on each of, more like there were sub-communities in the community. So for each language or each tribe, there was a traditional leader. And I had to go through all these traditional leaders to be able to gain access into their community. But getting access from the traditional leaders were quite easy than gaining access to the community members. Now, this is where my gatekeepers come in. The gatekeepers, from the stakeholders meeting, it led to the final selection of the slum. I had to replace 1 initially selected slum because of conflict and strife. So one of the slums, the Agoegun, was finally selected. And I went over to the meeting with the gatekeepers, like I was saying. The gatekeepers proved very important, particularly with context of culture and tradition. 2 of the slums, I couldn't do anything without the chief's sons, which proved as my gatekeepers. Even if you were learned, even if you could understand their language or speak their language, so far you were not connected with the local chiefs or the sons of the local chief, I couldn't do anything. So I had to go through that. And the dynamics of the slums, like I was mentioning, the 3 slums have differences in terms of socioeconomic characteristics, demographic characteristics, access to food. Food availability was influenced by their culture, their tradition, their migration patterns. And now I'm presenting, this slide shows the meeting with the gatekeepers. To the far left is for the Ajegunle, to the middle is Makoko, and to the far right is my meeting with the Agoegun chief's son. Now, the emerging findings, this is still in progress, so I'll just be presenting it as it comes. The informal street vendors selling ready-to-eat meals and snacks played a central role, and it has been observed in other African countries that in slum settings, the informal street vendors are important for reasons such as time constraints, the timing of the availability of these street vendors, because I discovered as far as 2 a.m. in the middle of the night, they still had street vendors selling to them, and the affordability of the food sold. Over 50% of the women consumed diets that made minimum dietary diversity, and this was because they majorly consumed ready-to-eat meals. They purchased their meals majorly. And there are variations in the consumption of healthy, such as the whole grains, the fruits and vegetables, and unhealthy food options. And also interactions with the slum food environment were influenced by factors such as the income, food prices, social relationship proved very important to them. If you were not friends with me, I don't buy from you. Those were the kind of things that came out from the focus group discussion, and culture and tradition. And particularly for Makoko and Agoegun, their tradition and their migration patterns influenced the kind of food they had available, because they had to find their own food. Makoko and Agoegun slum dwellers, like I mentioned, they are migrants from the Benin Republic, Cotonou, so they had to eat things that were from their own. And finally, in Makoko, food accessibility was influenced by climate variability. I found out that it was very, very important to them because of the terrain of their location. They have floods from the period of September to November. But in January, there's a low level of the sea. So for the mobile vendors to move across, it was difficult. So it influenced the kind of foods they had available during this period. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Eben. Really well done, and such a fascinating project in food environments which really, challenging conditions, and there's really not been any food environment research in these type of settings, so it's really fascinating work. So now we're going to move on briefly to the pre-recorded presentation.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Lydia O'Meara. I am a nutritionist and a PhD student with the Natural Resources Institute. Today, I am sharing preliminary results from my PhD on the validation of a remote diet data collection tool using interactive voice recordings on mobile phones to assess women's dietary diversity in Northern Uganda. By way of background, there is a global need for more diet data. Nutritious diets are essential for health, and diet quality is a key indicator that we use for assessing food system changes and monitoring progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. However, we globally have a lack of individual diet data, and particularly for seasonal dietary changes. We also have very large gaps for hard-to-reach population groups, and this is because enumerator-led methods can be costly and expensive because of remoteness, vehicles, fuel, and wages, and internet-based methods which face challenges with low literacy and low mobile phone ownership. To reassure everyone, this is a photo off the internet. This is not a photo of our research teams. However, as some of you will have experienced in your own fieldwork, there is certain population groups that are hard to reach, and they are even harder to reach during certain times of the year, such as the wet season. They're also harder to reach during mobility restrictions, such as those associated with COVID-19 and Ebola outbreaks. What is concerning is that it's these times of the year, such as the hungry wet season, where their food insecurity and their diet quality is most at risk. However, there's currently a lack of validated tools for remote diet data collection. Therefore, the research question of part of my PhD was, what is the feasibility and the validity of collecting dietary diversity data remotely using IVR on mobile phones compared with traditional face-to-face methods, and in particular with hard-to-reach women during the wet season in rural northern Uganda? This is a map of Uganda, and this highlights where we were working in Apache and Kwania districts, near the River Nile and Lake Kwania and the associated swamplands. We faced a few challenges. During formative research, we found that low literacy was very high, and some women struggled to read even the numbers on the phone. We also found that there was gender-based violence around mobile phone use that we needed to account for in our data collection protocol. Also, we ended up doing data collection during one of the wettest wet seasons in Uganda in 20 years. So as some of you will have experienced, that means floodwaters, impassable roads, and also wet season illnesses that we experienced within the team, including malaria and bilharzia. During 2022, a lot of projects were also affected by the global financial economy, and ours was no different. We were affected by the currency conversion crash between the pound and the Ugandan shilling, so we ended up with less project funds in a context where we had increased project costs because of vehicle hire associated with the wet season, and also more fuel costs. Fuel was more expensive, but we also required more because we needed to do detours to find alternative routes to get to the villages because the main roads were cut off. During data collection, Uganda also experienced an Ebola outbreak in the western and the central regions. This didn't spread to the north. However, I share these contextual details with you to, one, demonstrate again what we all know, the challenges with primary data collection in low resource context, but then also the context within this, that this mobile phone tool has been validated, and to highlight where its potential use could be in future studies. We used a computerized interactive voice recording. We worked with 156 mother-child pairs that were randomly selected, and data collection was during August to December 2023. We used a 24-hour list-based dietary diversity recall for women and children, and this was from the standardized question from the Demographic and Health Survey, the latest version, the Phase 8. We used the Engage Spark digital data collection platform, and we scheduled the calls for one call, and it was usually mid to late morning. When the women received the call, they responded by pressing either 1 for yes on the keypad or 3 for no, and it took on average 23 minutes. I validated the dietary diversity from the IVR, then against the weighed food records, which is the gold standard, and the enumerator-led 24-hour diet recalls, which is the most common traditional method. From the feasibility perspective, 74% of our women completed the IVR survey. To put this in context, this is actually a very high completion rate compared to other studies, which usually have a completion rate for mobile phone surveys of approximately 30%. Also, 97% of women reported that they would be willing to use a mobile phone again in future dietary intake studies. One woman said it was easy to hear and understand the questions. And another said she was excited since had never used a phone before. From a feedback perspective, one said no call received due to poor network. This is a challenge. We did address this by having multiple SIM cards for multiple carriers. And with the Engage Spark platform, we also scheduled repeat callbacks. So if the network dropped while the woman was completing the survey, it would call her back and she could pick up where she had left off. And this did help with our completion rate. Also, another said phone call took so long, each question was being repeated twice. And this highlights again the importance of working very closely with the women to make sure that they have a chance to become familiar with the mobile phone, they understand the instructions of pressing 1 and 3, and also how firmly to press on the keys to make sure that the response is recorded with the platform. From the validity perspective, our preliminary results for the women's dietary diversity indicate that at the population level, we found no statistical difference in the percentage of women meeting the minimum dietary diversity between the IVR and the enumerator-led recall method, which is fantastic. They're comparable at the population level. However, statistical differences were noted in the dietary diversity score. This might be due to individual day-to-day variance because the two methods that we're comparing here the data was collected on 2 different days within the 1 week. However, the IVR did appear to underestimate the dietary diversity score by 1 food group, and this appears to be connected to underreporting with vitamin A-rich fruits and vegetables, which is an area to explore in future studies to understand was this related to translation, clarity of the question, or something else. Key take-home message is that preliminary results from our study indicate that the IVR mobile phone method works well for collecting diet data remotely, and in particular for determining dietary quality of women at the population level. This we have demonstrated with this 1 population group during 1 season in Northern Uganda, and it would be great to now trial this in other contexts and other seasons. Also, from our experience, the IVR mobile phone method has potential for improving the timeliness and frequency of diet data collection, especially for seasonal diet changes, which could complement large 4-yearly cross-sectional studies or surveys such as the Demographic and Health Surveys. It potentially could reduce costs in those longitudinal high-frequency data collection situations, such as monitoring the effects of environmental policies or agriculture nutrition interventions. And it could also be used for early warning systems, such as monitoring diet quality changes of hard-to-reach population groups during high-risk seasonal food insecurity times, such as the wet, hungry season, or infectious disease outbreaks, such as COVID-19 or Ebola. Thank you. Webelinho, apoyo, and happy to take any questions.
Brilliant, thank you. So again, 3 really nice presentations there from some of our FaNSI research PhD students, and I think the interesting thing to me is not only the findings from the research, but also the learning that goes on throughout that journey, whether it be in the field or whether it be adapting methodologies and realities of doing field work. So again, some really interesting insights. So now we're going to move to the final part of our session. We are slightly behind time, so I'll move quickly, but I'd like to welcome Joyce Kinabo to the stage, and Joyce is a professor of human nutrition at Sokoine University of Agriculture in Tanzania, where she's been lecturing for more than 39 years. Her research is focused on maternal and child nutrition, adolescent nutrition, energy balance, and the thermal effect of food. She's involved in community nutrition research, focusing on enhancing the capacity of communities to identify solutions to their nutrition challenges. Through the recent Agri-Diet project, she led the country-level review of how national policies impact upon nutrition in Tanzania. And she recently participated in regional and country-level engagements in preparation for the UN Food Systems Summit, as well as the Africa Food Systems Forum. So currently she's the country PI for an IFPRI-funded project looking at investigating the production, the marketing and consumption of fruits and vegetables in Tanzania. So welcome, Joyce. We're looking forward to your keynote presentation. Warm hand.
I put this down because I think I'm stunted. Stunted by birth. Good afternoon, everybody. And as already introduced, my presentation is on food systems and nutrition. I didn't just break it into any different levels. And thank you, organizers, for having me in this very important conference. So I picked up this from previous books. You are what you eat. And we can see from that other side what it takes to eat and to be what you eat. As far as the outline of my presentation, I'll just talk a little bit about nutrition. I know we have people who are not really from that fraternity, and then talk a little bit about body systems, because sometimes we don't capture that information. And then what is the nutrition situation in this global earth and food systems, and try to see what do we need to do in terms of research and skills to be able to function in this changing kind of environment. So basically, nutrition is a science that interprets the interaction between foods we eat and the nutrients contained in it, but other components that are present in the foods. And the interaction and the body processes in the relationship with growth, maintenance, reproduction, health, and diseases. So it's a huge thing. But we also look at all the processes that lead to getting food on the table and in our tummies, so that at the end of the day, we use the nutrients for metabolism. So, already mentioned by previous speakers, good nutrition is key for healthy, productive. This is what is captured in the food security definition, but I added reproductive, which is always not captured. And this reproductive aspect is a challenge in many areas, especially in low and middle income countries. So we want to have that healthy reproductive life as well. So you could see that if you have adequate intake of nutrients, and we are talking here of about 42 different nutrients per day, and not just one nutrient or one type of food, 42 different nutrients per day. So you have all that, physical cognitive development, increased human capital productivity, generation of wealth and economic development, and you have everybody, feeling happy. But if you have inadequate intake, and we are seeing that in terms of macronutrient, we have all the opposite of that, and the economic cost is great. 4.5% of GDP actually being spent in addressing micronutrient malnutrition. And labor productivity goes down, premature deaths, diseases. But also we have one problem that is really with us now. We have increased intake of one or several nutrients. And our challenge here is increased intake of energy. And if that is not balanced with energy expenditure, it means that we have overweight, obesity. And overweight or obesity also lowers productivity, isn't it? And higher medical costs in terms of the comorbidities that come with the overweight and obesity. You have higher medical costs due to diabetes, hypertension, heart diseases, and all that. And it's not only for individuals, but for countries and globally. So the cost of NCDs, I think, is much higher than the cost of undernutrition. So this is something that we need to take note of that. But again, we are seeing that now we are talking about food systems, but we also have body systems. They are different. There are many. We have like at least 10, depending on the classification, 10 body systems. And these actually have to work together to be able to make us the way we are. And in order for them to work, they need nutrients. And each system has different set of nutrients that it needs in order to function. So we have energy and we have minerals and vitamins that have to be there steadily, supply, and oxygen and water to be able to survive. So, but in addition to that, the cells, tissues, and organs must work efficiently for you to be able to use the nutrients. Otherwise, it's not possible to use that. So what happens when you don't get sufficient, or if you get excess of nutrients? And that's why we talk of malnutrition, because you are either having more or you're having less. And if there's imbalance, you're having the nutrients, but there's imbalance of utilization of the nutrients, so you end up being malnourished. And this is manifested as undernutrition, but also overweight, obesity, and the diseases associated with that. So what is the situation? What do we see in terms of malnutrition? So malnutrition, I don't know what's the English translation of that. I know malnutrition is not an English word. I stand to be corrected. But this is what we are seeing. So we are having like 1.9 billion people globally who are overweight and obese. 1.9 billion, close to 2 billion. And then we're having 159 million children who are stunted, 50 million wasted, women with anemia, and women who are, or adults who are underweight, 462 million. And then we have young children who are obese. But what does this mean? Close to 2 billion. That's the total population of China, Indonesia, and Pakistan. Because sometimes when we talk about these statistics, we don't put it into context as what does it mean to have 1.2 billion? Where are they? What are they doing? What are the challenges? So we are talking of 1.9 as a population of China. Taking all Chinese today to be overweight and obese, what would happen in their own country? And then we have Indonesia added on, and then Pakistan. And then we have 159 children who are stunted. That's the population of Russia and Zimbabwe combined. And when we are talking of Western, that's the population of South Korea with all its advancement in technology. But if you take that population as stunted Western children, that's a huge population. And then you have this other one, overweight and obesity. That's the population of Poland. So let's think about that in that context. It's not just an individual out there somewhere, but if we put them together, what does that tell us? So malnutrition is also not uniform across the globe. As you can see here, we have the lower income countries if we do the World Bank classification. Low-income countries, that's where we have a lot of stunting. But as you move to high-income countries, you have overweight and obesity. So nobody is spared. I think we are all in the same boat as far as malnutrition is concerned. And looking at the continent, you can see Africa, Asia, and Latin America having higher stunting rates. But we are seeing obesity and overweight in Europe, Australia, and America. So this is a problem for all of us. So why the scenario? Why are we in this situation? Lack of sustainable diets, traditional. I think even Europe, America has seen changes as far as diet is concerned. They've shifted their diets to something totally different from what they used to consume. Diets that are low in micronutrients, low consumption of fruits and vegetables, and all that. And now we have the influence of the industry. This has already been mentioned. And what does it mean? It means that undernutrition is still high, overweight and obesity increasing. So the presence of malnutrition here indicates that food systems are not supporting nutrition in a way. And that's why we are in that situation. So we need also to answer this question. Which food systems are associated with which malnutrition risks, so that we are able to address that particular food system? Or what type of food system can actually help us alleviate all problems of malnutrition? So these are huge questions that we probably need to put in our research agenda to be able to answer some of these questions. So food systems, I think they've already been defined, but we need to understand that adequate supply of nutrients needed by the body begins with the diet. But how do we get that diet? So diets are derived from components existing in the given food system. That's where we get our diets. So food systems ensure that food or nutrients are actually available for consumption. But we know that they vary between different regions, and influences on the consumers are also different. So these interconnected systems in production, packaging, processing, and all that, they're also influenced by social, cultural, economic, spiritual, sometimes political and environmental contexts, which need to also be understood. So they all impact on our health and well-being. But I think we need, at this point, to appreciate that all forms of life in this world actually depend on plants. So only plants have been given that capacity, ability to make nutrients, nothing else. So they extract the nutrients from, or elements from the soil to make the nutrients that we see as food in various forms, either cereals, grains, tubers, and all that. And again, the allocation of nutrients in these crops is not uniform. They know their own technology, the AI that they use as plants to really allocate these nutrients accordingly. So actually, our life here depends on soil health. So we did a study some time ago, and that's why you have the cover page for my report, From Soil Elements to Food Nutrients. And you can see what is in the soil. These are elements, just calcium, potassium, and zinc, and all others. But then you see that as a mango, or as maize. It's amazing how things actually happen. So this is what we need to look at, the soil health. And I don't know whether we have soil scientists in this room, because we are talking about food security, so I had expected to see soil scientists, plant physiologists in this room so that they can also understand what is going on. But again, the issue of climate change is huge because it affects how nutrients are actually allocated, extracted from the soil and allocated in the staple crops. But we have other production sites, the rivers, seas, and oceans for the fish and other aquatic products. So this is an area that also needs to be addressed. And this is done, actually the exploitation of seas, rivers and oceans is done at the expense of the people. And this is something that research has to actually address. So all this, what we are seeing here, soil health and all that, actually part of the SDG 2, the food security goal. And then we have the SDG 13, but also SDG 15. And all these, we are nowhere near to really attaining them because of the things that are going on. So efforts to address SDGs must be done holistically and involve different types of knowledge and skills, which some of it actually we don't have it at the moment, so we need to work on that. So when talking about food systems, it's about production, processing, and all that. So when you talk of production systems, I've avoided using the word agriculture here with all its connotations. I'm just going to focus on food production or nutrient production. So we have different types of food production systems. We have crop production, and we have like monoculture, we have mixed culture. And I was thinking, like, for a monoculture, we've seen the elements in the soil. For monoculture, you have a large land that you're using it to produce only one type of nutrient. We are planting rice in a large piece of land, only to get carbohydrate out of that. But if we could do mixed, we could probably be able to extract more nutrients for the foods and for the people, rather than having one crop. So we need to think, should we go back to the mixed cropping so that we can make maximum use of the soil and get maximum nutrients that we can have in the foods, or continue with the monoculture so that we get one nutrient at a time? So for this type of system, the diets are really based on cereals or tubers and limited animal foods. Vegetables and fruits are limited in terms of consumption. And there's a shift dietary pattern. This is what we see in this type of. And nutrition concerns, again, we have undernutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, and overweight and obesity. But we have the livestock system. In Africa, these are still there. We have the pastoral production system. It's not organized the way it is organized in other continents. You need to go out there and, grow your animals. So it needs a very extensive land area to be able to produce that. But the diet is based on the products that they are making from the animals, and it's limited in vegetable and fruits production. But again, limited kind of nutrition problems that we see among the people who operate under this production system. But it's highly susceptible to climate change. We still have the gathering and hunting going on in Africa, and quite a bit of population is depending on this one. I know we have a significant proportion of the population in Arusha, for instance, in Tanzania, where they're still doing the hunting and gathering. And obviously, for them to be able to survive, they need untouched land, vast in terms of size, so that they can be able to hunt or allow even the animals to reproduce in those areas. It is really a high activity pattern, because to be able to go out there in the field and hunt is not something small. You need to invest energy and everything. So we have low incidences of CVDs in these areas, and I don't think if it's an appropriate diet in its current form, and it's highly susceptible to climate change. Other production systems with aquaculture and hydroponic farming, which is coming up, but hydroponic farming is limited to very limited number of crops, like vegetables. It's possible to do that. You cannot do hydroponic farming for rice, for instance, in a water system. So those are the kind of systems that, which one should we really tagged so that we can be able to reduce the incidences and prevalences of malnutrition. Another area of food system is about processing. Processing is done, and I think you agree with me that we saw in the presentation by Amos the number of processed foods that are marketed. So, and we have different processing techniques, and we have foods that are not highly processed and then extremely processed. And sometimes I ask myself, does food processing really add value to a food, or reduce its value and increase waste? For instance, if you mill grains, you remove the aloe-rea, which has all the nutrients needed for consumption, and you remain with starch, basically. So is that adding value or reducing value? And you have ultra-processed foods, which are sold cheaply, but minimally processed foods are sold expensively. So I'm not sure whether I'm getting that economics right, that you have a minimally processed food that is sold very expensive and a highly processed foods that is sold cheaply. I don't know, it's perhaps the volume that matters, and the economists and the industry people would be able to tell us probably. So food processing should protect the nutrients. In fact, after the plants have labored so much to put the nutrients in the first place, and then we come in and process and remove all of it, and then come back later on with fortification. It doesn't make sense. So we need to have agriculturists, food scientists, processors, and everybody to actually make sure that we get food that is wholesome, instead of processing it to the extent that you can't even recognize whether it's a cereal or a root or a tuber or something totally different. So this is what is. And we're seeing changes in food consumption pattern. Now traditional food habits and ethnic cuisines are replaced with highly processed, ready-to-eat products, soft drinks, supermarket foods, westernized diets. I don't know what else will come after this, but we are seeing like dietary convergence. Everybody now can eat pizza. Even in a remote area in Tanzania, there's crave for pizza. And this is convergence. So, and this narrow base of products, not even wide, high meat intake and all that. So dietary adaptation is also increasing. Like probably before we could say that, no, I cannot eat this processed food. My stomach cannot really. But now everybody is adapting to that. And it's very strange. How come that we have changed so much within a very short period of time to be able to adapt to these new foods? So basically, the food system here is about production, but these nutrients have to be given to the body systems. And these body systems now would transform that into our nutrition outcome. So what needs to be done? What needs to be done is about research, and now we are seeing that research concepts and questions should address food systems and nutrition in a holistic manner, because we have gone to nano-specialization, really tiny kind of specialization without thinking across, inside, without the box. I think we need to dismantle the boxes and see how we can move on with that. And this calls for large research teams, actually, of various disciplines, including community members, because community members can also be good researchers, but we have not been using them effectively and efficiently. So they do participate as people who know the context. Because for some of us, even from the university, you go to a community, you're an outsider. You don't know much about what is going on there, dynamics there. We need more investment on food system research, and which is really not given that attention so far. including policy research on consumption. We don't have policies on consumption, and I don't know if really anywhere, I haven't heard or learned that there are policies for consumption. We have policies for production, processing, whatever, but not consumption. But you need also to understand the continuum of activities that are interlinked to ensure that food is placed there, but also understand the socioeconomic, cultural, spiritual, and governance aspects of the food systems. Develop research methods and tools for analysis. I think this is something that NRA is trying to do, but we need more people to come on board to really come up with tools and methods to do that. But also understand food systems from consumers' perspective. So from the supply side and not from the demand side and not from the supply side. In terms of capacity, empowerment of consumers, I think this is an area that is not really being addressed adequately on aspects of food systems and nutrition, but invest in the youth to be able to articulate food system approaches and become leaders in food system transformation for better nutrition. Because sometimes these things are discussed at a higher level, and we forget completely about communities, youth. And youth are never invited in this. They are considered not yet. They are not yet ready. They are not yet, but I guess they are ready all the time, so we need to include them in that, so that at the end of the day, we have leaders that will take over from what we are doing. And develop knowledge and skill sets across disciplines for transformation of nutrition-sensitive, consumer-centered food systems. I was just thinking aloud, probably, that we need to have a training program on food systems. This is something new that has just come up, and everybody is trying to say whatever is considered appropriate at that particular moment, but we need to also instill this information in our students. Can we include that in our curricula so that they're able to capture this knowledge early enough? So to conclude, I would say that food systems and nutrition are complex topics, but related. Not a single system, but multiple systems with varying characteristics and changing constantly. And this is what we need to take into consideration. They're not static. They keep changing, and how can we be able to cope with the changes that are happening? Require holistic, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approaches to understand them. And we have seen that there's less emphasis now on energy expenditure, which is something that can help us in a way to alleviate some of the NCDs that we see. And energy balance studies are no longer like in existence. So lastly, what food system can do for nutrition and what nutrition can do for food system. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joyce. So, really interesting presentation, really pulling together a lot of the parts we've heard from earlier in the day. I've been told we don't have time for questions because we are running slightly behind time, but what I would encourage you is to go and find Joyce during the lunch break. It's not lost on me that the great irony of the fact that a lot of our research into food systems and nutrition ends up meaning that we end up missing our lunch or delaying our lunch. So we are behind time and we will move on. But what I would like to say is that we've heard already about food systems. Joyce just introduced the concept of body systems as well into the mix, and now we're going to move towards urban systems too, just to complicate things further. So I'd like to welcome Sophia Schuff up to the stage from GEL, from Copenhagen in Denmark. Sophia is a director at GEL, an urban design practice on a mission to create equitable, healthy and sustainable cities for people and planet. She leads the urban strategy team, servicing foundations and philanthropic organizations. And Sophia's commitment to enhancing the quality of urban spaces stems from her background as an anthropologist and draws from a deep understanding of the human experience within the built environment. So we're really pleased to have you here, Sophia, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you. A warm hand, please. Just press the green button to me.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry you're still hungry and have a little bit longer to wait before you get to eat. Strange to be talking about food while you're hungry. But thank you so much. It's an honor to be here talking with you today. Yeah, it feels a little interesting that I'm talking about urban systems when we're hearing a lot about nutrition, especially in rural and agrarian environments, but I think it's really, really important to also understand the urban context and how we as planners and urbanists can support the transition to healthier and sustainable food systems. So, I'm coming from private practice. I'm a consultant, and we are really on a mission to figure out how best to make partnerships to create these transitions. And so I think this question that's coming up again and again this morning around partnerships really rings true to me. So Gail, we're an urban consultancy, and we work with master planning, urban design, urban planning to create healthy, sustainable, and equitable cities. And we are working quite globally. We're actually a pretty small practice. We're around 130 people based in San Francisco, New York, and Copenhagen, but we work in a very wide variety of locations, as you can see. Our office is made up of a very multidisciplinary group of people. We have architects, urban planners, landscape architects, but we also have data scientists, anthropologists like myself, sociologists, and even some food experts in our office, and public health experts as well. So we are really bridging between the design practice and the strategy practice. How can we enable transitions in our cities, and in a wide variety of cities and towns, as you can see. We really look at the platform for change as the urban environment, our streets, our shared public spaces. This is where the transition can happen most readily. So we work with the streets, the sidewalks, the ground floors, and the storefronts, so with vendors, for example, with play and recreational spaces, transit, and parks and plazas, so really the public realm. And we see this as a pivotal platform for the kind of civic outcomes that we're trying to design for, whether that's participation in the civic movement, economic opportunities, environmental sustainability, health and well-being, or social connection and cohesion. The built environment, the urban environment, that's our platform to create these impacts. This guy is our founder. He is quite a famous urbanist in my industry, and he founded Gale around 30 years ago. Jan Gale, he was one of the first architects that asked the question, how do we design a city for people? Traditionally, in the modernist urban design and architectural practice, cities were designed for cars. They were designed by somebody standing above a model, making a beautiful street that didn't actually perform well for the people that it was meant to serve. And so he went about a practice of trying to study the human animal to understand what our needs are, fundamentally what our needs are, and how the built environment can be a platform to serve people rather than a platform to create kind of unhealthy behaviors, you could say, in the city. So he used Copenhagen actually as a real test bed, a living laboratory. He worked with the city of Copenhagen for over 30 years to start introducing changes in the urban environment to understand what does that do for one's health outcomes? What does it do for our social mobility or economic mobility? And so he worked with Copenhagen to transition a lot of the public spaces from places for cars to places for people or economic opportunity. I think something that's really interesting about this is still today, most of our cities are actually designed by traffic engineers. I don't know how many of you, where most of you live, but it's quite possible that those that are planning, zoning your cities are run with data that is informed by cars, where cars should be parked, where cars should drive, not for people. There are very, very few cities in the world that have a department dedicated to serving people and understanding people. The closest thing that we get to that is often maybe a public health department. But we even know that often public health departments are not working in concert with planning departments. So this is something that we're really trying to understand, is how can we bring these initiatives together to serve people more possibly. And we do this by really trying to understand what the user experience is of our neighborhoods and our communities so that we can design for that. You're still wondering, when am I going to get to the food? I promise I will. But I got to give you the background before I get there. So what we try to understand is really what the essence of human behavior is, how we use our senses in the city, both eyesight, where do we look, what is our cone of vision when we're out in the street, what does smell initiate when we walk down the street and we smell something good or bad, fatty, unhealthy, how does that make us reach into our pockets and buy something? So we really want to understand what the human animal is and how we use the city. And something that I think is quite interesting about this when we start to think about like food environments, for example, is that the human nature makes it that we are craving around 1,000 stimuli per every hour. And so when we kind of move through the urban environment, we look for something to stimulate us every 4 seconds. This is just part of our biological, our nature, you could say. But most of our cities look a lot like this. They're dull, they're not activated, they're not friendly, they're very isolating spaces. And so again, a space like this, you know, it might seem like it's stimulating, but it's not. It's very dull and inactive. So from a design perspective, when we start to understand what people want from their environment, we can start to introduce different ways to design for people to use the environment to do things that actually might increase their health outcomes. So from a design approach, what we do is first design with life at the center, trying to understand what behavior people should have is and design for that. Then we think about what the spaces are that can become a platform for that life that we want to see. And then lastly, the buildings. This is actually a really flipped paradigm from the way that most urbanists, urban planners, architects design our cities. So the way that we do this, fundamentally the way that we work with understanding life, is that we collect a lot of data. So while we're not academics and researchers and scientists, we are designers that deploy an evidence-based kind of methodology. So we use a lot of data to inform our design process, not only from like a socio-demographic level, but we also observe the lived experience from eye level of people in their urban environments so that we can use that data to inform the design. So a really easy to kind of grasp case of this is when we worked in New York. I don't know how many of you have been to Times Square, but a while ago, Times Square was never really a square, it was more like a traffic island. Again, a famous world-class place that was designed for cars, not people. So when we went and we did an observational eye-level kind of data analysis to understand the behavior of people, and we found that the patterns of people that we saw using Times Square in New York, 10% of the area was for pedestrians, was allocated for pedestrian use. 90% of the people, the users in Times Square, were pedestrians, not the cars. So we brought this evidence, this data, to the city, to the mayor's office, and worked with them to create a design proposal to transition this space from being a place that was for cars to being a place that was for people and for economic activity, for people to thrive and socialize and enjoy this world-class plaza that is Times Square. So we went from a street for cars, and then we started piloting very simple ideas, chairs, tables, umbrellas, actually kind of shitty stuff. We just put it out there to see how people would use it. And you would think that the number one complaint that we would get when starting to pilot an initiative like this was, hey, let me bring back my cars. Hey, the taxis, where are they supposed to drive? Now the rerouted buses, da-da-da-da-da. The number one piece of feedback that we got from people was, these chairs are really bad quality. Can we get some better chairs? I'm telling you, human behavior, right? So by using such a simple activity, we could then create a plaza that now today you can go and enjoy. So how does this relate to health and the food environment? This is our design practice. This is how we work. That's our approach. So we are applying this also to trying to understand how we can design for healthy, thriving neighborhoods. We know that 80% of determinants of health can be designed for within neighborhoods. So 20% of our health is tackled through clinical care. The rest is actually something that we can truly design for. So that being said, what we're trying to understand is the kind of interconnectedness of our social environments, the ways in which we eat and access health and culture and social kind of cohesion, the way that we spend our time together and access the nutrition that we need, and then the spatial city character itself. So how does this all connect with each other? What we've started to realize is that, and I think many of you represent a lot of these two sides of this scale. You have people who are very focused on the individual. How can we get someone to adopt a healthier diet? And then we have people who are focused on this incredibly complex system. And we feel that our place as designers is somewhere in the middle at the neighborhood scale, where we can really design and start to create these altered environments to invite people to different kinds of habits and lifestyles in the way that they access food or other healthy options in the city. So what we've done over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been actually working with Novo Nordisk's Cities Changing Diabetes program. And we've been working with them to create a toolbox for cities around the world to collect the kind of data that we collect about the way that people use the built environment, do these kind of observations into the human animal to understand the way that food environments are performing for people. So we've created a toolbox to kind of address these issues and train people in a really simple way, practitioners, city officials, researchers, how to do this methodology in the city. So our goal, along with Novo, is to create a neighborhood that makes healthy choices the easy choice by increasing healthy food access, creating a more dignified public realm, and empowering community members to amplify their experience as a data point, have them show up and make their voice known through the data that is being collected. So we've been applying this approach and this data toolkit that I'll show you in a moment in many different cities. So far, you can see here, but we're really working to kind of deploy this to local partners on the ground. As I said, I'm based in Copenhagen. I should not necessarily be the arbiter of this full methodology, but we are training people to do this approach in the context that they live in. I'll skip this. So the approach itself, of the way that this toolkit works, is that first, it's about studying the foodscapes, the food environments, and crafting insights into what people's lived experience is in their food environments. Then piloting interventions for a healthier neighborhood. Again, tactical, low-fidelity solutions to start piloting how we can shift people's behaviors, and then scaling those initiatives from a policy perspective or from a built environment implementation perspective. So the toolkit is kind of comprised of a couple different components. We have tools around how we understand the context itself. How do we map and understand it? Tools around how we listen to people, the questions that we ask, the methods that we use to engage people, and then tools around observing the foodscape itself, the food environment, what is it made up of and how is it performing? So I'll walk you through these. I'm also keeping my eye on Chris to know just like what my time situation is, but you can tell me. So the toolkit first in this section around understanding the context, we define the purpose itself. What is our research question? We get to know the context. We do these mappings of the demographics, of the people there, and of the food environment itself. And then we're mapping the food, the macro foodscape. So a very good example of how this works is a case from Philadelphia, where we were working in an area that had quite a low-income neighborhood. 64% of the households in this environment were families, 45% living below the poverty line. So with that context, we did a food environment mapping from a macro scale to understand what's going on here. We can see from the mapping that there's actually quite a large diversity of food options available to people. You can see a 10-minute walking radius around the grocery stores. Yeah, there's grocery stores, there are food locations in this neighborhood. And then when we start to dig in to understand what the quality of the food environment is, we could see that only 19% of the residents are in a walkable distance to their grocery store in the neighborhood. So then we get to the listening to people, because that just gives us a macro understanding of what's happening in this place. It doesn't tell us anything about how we should tackle the challenges. So in this, we have tools around how we engage with communities, ways in which to do intercept interviews or targeted interviews or online questionnaires, and a lot of different workshop techniques to work with communities to understand their food experience. And back to Philly, what we did is after running this engagement process of interviewing, doing qualitative deep dive sessions with residents, we started to understand that this area in the box here, this is Temple University. While we see that there are food options available to people, once we interview residents and work with the residents, we understand that these are incredibly bougie, fancy, like poke bowl places. Nobody that lives in this neighborhood wants to go to these food locations. So in essence, what we start to learn is that the places that people feel welcomed and not excluded are actually very few. So people don't live within a walking distance of any food options in this neighborhood. So this gives us a really tangible way to start thinking about how do we start to design solutions to address that from an urban perspective. Then lastly, we have these tools around how we observe the food environment. So we have these tools that help you, they're digital tools actually. We've created an app, so it's really easy for people to go out into the food environment and map this digitally. So they're tools that allow you to document the actual environment, like what does it contain, whether it's the prices on the menus or the opening hours or the visible quality of the food place, but also the lived experience of people. So I'll show you in a moment what that looks like. So the tools that the app contains are ways to observe how people move with food. So we could start to say, oh, this neighborhood has 30% women moving with groceries, and it has, let's say 70% men moving with groceries. Okay, what is this about this place that's creating an environment like that? We can also observe how people spend time and the kind of food activities that they're engaged in. So we can start to see, oh, caregivers are with small children recreating and also eating food in the public realm. Then we can map the food places at eye level, what the quality of them is, assess the general urban quality of these environments, and record qualitative observations with communities. So when we're observing movement, these are actually all GIFs, but you can't see them in action now. But when we observe movement, what we're able to do is say, are there people walking in this place? How are they moving? How are they represented versus the people that are staying in this place? And vice versa, also how people are staying. So with the app, you're registering where are the people spending time, how does this relate to the design of the place itself, what ages and genders are represented in the people that are staying here. So it's really giving you this lived experience visibility. And some of the food-related activities that you can observe in the app are things like drinking or eating snacks, eating fresh food, buying groceries, delivering food. So you can see many, many different food options, and there are more in the app. And then it also allows you to map the food places at eye level, so you can start to document what quality they have, what design signals that they're sending out, so that we can start to compare that at a more quantitative level with how people are actually using the place. And then we assess the urban quality. So like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we cannot have a very successful food environment if people don't feel safe, if they're not accessing their basic needs. So we first start with mapping the basic needs around how people feel in this place. And then, are they comfortable? Are there invitations to stay? Are there good acoustics? Is there an ability to walk or to bike? And then lastly, enjoyment around the aesthetics, and if it's human scale, if it's a place that you can really find joy and engage with the community. So another case, just to represent this, is from a study that we had done in London, actually, in Camberwell and Peckham, where we were studying the way that young people in particular have access to healthy food environments and how they use their food environments. And we started to observe that despite the fact that there were so many food choices on the high streets, we saw that the fast food places, mostly chicken shops and McDonald's, were paying 10x the price, the kind of market price, to locate themselves right next to the bus stops. Because in these neighborhoods, young people, they use the bus to get to school. So this is how we can understand, again, the kind of catchment area of where people are eating, and then study and interview with the young people what it is about the bus stop that makes them feel comfortable and welcome there, what it is that they get out of the relationship that they have with the vendors of the food places that they visit. When we were interviewing them, they were often telling us about how they feel safest in the places where there's maybe a person that works there every day, and they know that person by name, that person knows them, they recognize them. So the cultural and social capital of the food places plays such a pivotal role in the young people's lives, and that's why they go to those food places. So this is what we're trying to capture with this kind of data collection process. So lastly is how we craft those insights. And I don't have time to give you the full case study, but we actually have reports on our website, or I could send a link so you could dive in and see how a lot of this data distills into design solutions. So I don't have time to go through this, but what we essentially do is go from understanding people, what their lived experience is in this place, and then I'm just going to skip through, and then try to understand what the physical environment barriers are for people to access food. So for example, in this place in Lisbon, we understood that because of the long commute times, people could not access the food that they wanted or needed. It's not a question of demand, it's a question of the urban system that's creating a barrier to access. So there's a lot of stuff in here, but I'll just skip through it, and you can always have a look at the report later. But essentially, I think the take-home here is that all of these methods and tools that we're using to inform this design process are available on this website, thrivingfoodscapes.com, and it's open source. So you're welcome to go on the website and have a look and see if any of these methods resonate to you. There's also a contact page on there. So if you're interested in learning more about how you might be able to apply some of this methodology in your own settings, please do reach out. We just formulated a partnership with the University of Toronto, who will be having a cohort of their master's students or public health master's students who will be applying these data collection methodologies in Toronto. So I think it would be very interesting to continue to try it in different locations and different settings to see how it can adapt to different settings and contexts. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sophia. That was a brilliant presentation. So you can hear the plates and the knives and forks rattling in the background, so I won't keep you for very long. But what I just wanted to say is a big thank you for sticking with us through the session. I really hope this has demonstrated the breadth and the depth of food systems and nutrition research as part of FaNSI and with our partners as well. Really from the technical, the real focused aspects of methods and metrics and how we measure these things, right to the public health and the policy end, and everything in between. We've talked about food systems, food environments, body systems, we've talked about policy systems and urban systems now at the end as well. And I think that really highlights that complexity and really the lived experience and really what shapes the foods that people eat and how we can make interventions and change things. The other thing I just wanted to pick up from the morning session as a whole is just the whole thing about partnerships. You know, we can talk about systems, and we often do when we talk about the activities and the things that happen in the systems, but we sometimes forget about that systems are about people as well that create those activities, that create the actions. And not only from FaNSI, but also in the wider food system, it's those partnerships and the practices and the people and the partnerships that really make those systems work. So I just want to end there, say thank you very much for listening. I'll let you go for lunch, and thanks again. Thank you.